There is a strip of grass outside your window that has never grown anything you could eat. You walk past it every day. You do not look at it. It gets mowed, edged, watered, and it produces nothing. But the real answer for why that strip exists is far stranger than neglect or bad planning. And it has almost nothing to do with grass. That strip is a scar. For most of the time, human beings have lived in cities. Land like that was not decoration, it was dinner. Between the temples and the workshops and the crowded houses, ancient cities grew food. Not in parks, not in symbolic little plots, in orchards, in vineyards, in rice paddies, in floating gardens that fed hundreds of thousands of people. So what happened? Start with the oldest city anyone wrote about, Uruk, in what is now southern Iraq, more than 4,000 years ago. The Epic of Gilgamesh opens by describing the city, and it does something no modern travel guide would ever do. It measures the city by land use. A portion is buildings, a portion is clay pits, a portion belongs to the temple, and roughly a third of the whole city, according to that ancient description, is date grove. Read that again. A third of the city was orchard. Not outside the walls, inside them. The date palm was the backbone of Mesopotamian life, and cuneiform tablets from these cities are full of orchard accounting, yields, and the men assigned to tend them. The city was not a place that received food. It was a place that also made it. And Uruk was not the exception. It was closer to the rule. Now travel to Cambodia and to a discovery that only became possible about a decade ago. For a century, Angkor was understood as a set of temples in a jungle. Magnificent stone swallowed by forest. What nobody could see was the ground underneath the trees. Then, archaeologists strapped a laser scanner to a helicopter. The technology is called lidar. In plain English, it fires millions of laser pulses at the ground, and a small fraction of them slip between the leaves, hit the earth, and bounce back. Strip away everything that hit a branch, and you are left with a map of the Burr soil that has not been seen in 800 years. What came back was not a temple complex. It was a city. Damien Evans and his colleagues published the results in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2013. And the maps showed formal street grids, embankments, canals, house mounds, and reservoirs spreading across hundreds of square kilometers. Roland Fletcher of the University of Sydney, who co-directs the Greater Angkor project, had argued for years that Angkor belonged to a category most people had never considered. He called it low-density agrarian urbanism. Unpack that phrase, because it is the key to everything. Low density means the people are spread out rather than stacked up. Agrarian means farming. Urbanism means it is genuinely a city, with all the politics and hierarchy and specialization a city implies. Put together, it describes a settlement where the farm is not next to the city. The farm is woven through it. At Angkor, people lived on raised earth mounds with gardens around their houses. And between those mounds ran the rice fields and the canals that watered them. Researchers modeling the population, including Sarah Klassen and Damien Evans in a 2021 study, have estimated that Greater Angkor may have held something on the order of 700,000 to 900,000 people at its height. A city approaching 1 million, mostly fed from inside itself. Does that sound like a city to you? Or does it sound like a very organized countryside? That question is not rhetorical. It is an actual argument among archaeologists right now. Some scholars insist a place that's sprawling should not be called a city at all. Others, including Christian Isendal and Michael E. Smith, argue the opposite. In a 2013 paper, they made the case that these settlements were fully urban. And that treating farming as an urban activity rather than a rural one is the entire point. The same laser technology rewrote the Maya world. Alan and Diane Chase began mapping Caracol in Belize this way and found the hillsides around and between houses carved into agricultural terraces. Then, in 2018, Marcelo Canuto and Francisco Estrada Belli led a survey of northern Guatemala that scanned more than 2,000 square kilometers of rainforest. They counted tens of thousands of structures, 61,000 of them. And in among the structures were terraces, drained wetland fields, and the unmistakable signature of intensive farming pressed right up against where people slept. Maya households kept what archaeologists call house lot gardens, small plots of maize and beans and squash and fruit trees, tended a few steps from the door. The population estimates jumped enormously. Millions of people in a landscape everyone had assumed was mostly empty. None of that was possible without food grown between the buildings. Then there is the city that made this look almost easy. Tenochtitlan, capital of the Aztec Empire, was built on an island in a shallow lake. Land was the one thing it did not have. So the answer was to build more, out of the lake itself. The system is called chinampa. You stake out a rectangle in the shallows, weave a frame and fill it with lake mud and rotting water plants, layer after layer, until you have a long narrow field, standing just above the water. You plant willows at the corners so the roots hold it together. Canals run between the plots, so the soil is never dry and the nutrients never really leave. Jeffrey Parsons of the University of Michigan spent much of his career working out what that system actually produced. His estimates put the southern Chinampa district at something like 9,000 hectares, capable of multiple staggered harvests every year, feeding a very large share of the capital. It may be the most productive farming system the pre-industrial world ever built. And it was not in the countryside. It was the city. Now go somewhere you would never expect to find a farm. Pompeii? When Vesuvius buried the town in ash, it buried the gardens too. And when plants rot away inside hardened ash, they leave a hollow shaped exactly like the roots. Wilhelmina Yashemsky realized what that meant. She began pouring plaster into those cavities, letting it set, and excavating the cast. What came out was the root system of a plant that died nearly 2,000 years ago, in its original position in the original soil. She did this thousands of times. At one site near the amphitheater, she recovered the root cavities of roughly 2,000 grapevines, laid out in regular rows with the posts and the wine pressing equipment still in place. It was not a garden. It was a working commercial vineyard, operating inside the city walls of a Roman town. She mapped market gardens too, growing produce and flowers for sale, tucked between houses and shops. So the Roman town had a vineyard in it. The Mesopotamian city was a third orchard. The Aztec capital floated on its own farmland. Why does your city not do this? Here comes the part that is genuinely strange, because the real obstacle was never space. It was fertility. Soil is not a container. It is a bank account. Every harvest is a withdrawal. And if nothing goes back in, the account empties and the land stops producing. Growing food densely in the same place year after year requires putting the nutrients back. So the question is, where ancient cities found them? The answer is that the cities produced them constantly, in enormous quantities. In Edo, the city that became Tokyo, human waste was not a problem to dispose of. It was a commodity to buy. Susan Hanley has documented how contractors purchased the waste of specific neighborhoods and households under contract, hauled it out by boat and cart, and sold it to farmers who fed the city in return. wealthier districts commanded a better price, because a better diet made better fertilizer. The American agronomist F.H. King traveled through China, Korea, and Japan and published his account in 1911. He was astonished. He described farming systems that had stayed productive for 40 centuries, not through new land, but through relentless, disciplined return of everything organic back to the soil. Think about what that means for a moment. The pre-modern city was not a straight line that swallowed food at one end and produced waste at the other. It was a loop. The food came from the ground nearby, the people ate it, and what came out of them went back into that same ground and became food again. The city fed the soil that fed the city. Compare that to now. Your food travels for days to reach you. What your body does not use travels somewhere else entirely, gets treated, and is very rarely returned to any farm at all. Two ends of the same cycle cut apart and move to opposite sides of the country. So when did the loop break? Mostly in the 19th and 20th centuries, and not because anyone decided cities should stop farming. Four things happened at once. Railways arrived, and then refrigerated shipping, and suddenly grain and meat from 1,000 miles away were cheaper than anything a city gardener could grow. Sanitation reform arrived, sewers and flush toilets, and the same infrastructure that ended cholera also flushed the fertilizer into the river. Synthetic fertilizer arrived, and fertility became something you bought in a bag instead of something you cycled. And finally, zoning arrived, and land use was formally sorted into categories, with agriculture written out of the residential ones. Every one of those was a reasonable decision. Nobody was wrong. Together, they took the oldest function of a city and quietly deleted it in about 3 generations. The orchards were built over. The market gardens became lots. The land that used to feed people became land that people simply looked at. That strip of grass outside your window is what was left. And here is the twist worth sitting with. Urban farming is often talked about as a new idea, a trend, something modern and slightly precious, involving rooftops and hydroponics, and a lot of enthusiasm. It is not new. It is the oldest thing cities do. What is new is the last 150 years, in which cities stopped. A widely repeated estimate from a United Nations Development Programme report in 1996 claims that urban agriculture already produces something like 15% of the world's food. That number is genuinely contested, and researchers have criticized how it was calculated, so hold it loosely. But even the careful modern estimates are striking. A 2018 study led by Nicholas Clinton modeled what the world's existing urban land could produce if it were actually used. And the answer ran to well over 100 million tons of food a year, alongside billions of dollars in benefits from things like stormwater absorption and reduced energy use. Not by inventing anything, by remembering something. You do not need a laser scanner to see it either. Look at the edges of your own city. The verges, the medians, the rooftops, the unused corners, the abandoned lot, the balcony, the school field, the strip of grass. Count how much of it grows something. Now, count how much of it could. For nearly the whole history of urban life, a city was a place where people lived among the things that fed them, and the ground between the buildings was the most valuable ground there was. That was normal. That was, until very recently, what a city meant. There is a strip of grass outside your window that has never grown anything you could eat. Your ancestors would not have been able to explain it. They would have looked at that soil sitting in the sun, doing nothing, and asked you the only question that made sense. Why is nothing planted there?